3 weeks after Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey's President Erdogan is promising that today he will reveal the full details of his police force's investigation into the death. And in an exclusive report from our partner channel NBC, it's emerged that Khashoggi met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's brother just months before he was killed. But first, NBC's Richard Engel reports on the new evidence that's emerged surrounding the journalist's death.
Saudi Arabia denies it ordered journalist Jamal Khashoggi to be killed. Officials say a fight broke out and he ended up dead. But reports an advisor to the Saudi crown prince was on Skype with the killers giving orders. The advisor was fired last week. Turkey says Saudi Arabia brutally murdered Khashoggi and then bungled the cover-up, including the unconvincing use of a body double. Turkish officials leaked to CNN security footage of this man walking around Istanbul after Khashoggi was dead, dressed in his clothing and glasses. A pro-government TV station here aired this. It says they're Saudi officials burning documents at their consulate after Khashoggi's murder. Turkey says the amateurish killers left a clear trail of evidence. A forensic team has just arrived at this underground parking lot where police have found an abandoned vehicle with Saudi diplomatic plates. Turkey has been revealing damning information about its old regional rival, Saudi Arabia, day by day. But the White House says it still needs more time to examine the facts. And Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin met with the man who's now the focus of global scrutiny, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince. Richard Engel, NBC News, Istanbul.
Well, the Saudi ambassador to the US is the brother of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And now an exclusive investigation by our partner station NBC has revealed that Jamal Khashoggi met with Prince Khalid bin Salman just months before being killed. To find out more about this, I'm joined now by NBC's national political reporter, Josh Lederman, who broke this news. Good morning to you, Josh. Great to speak to you this morning. What more can you tell us about that meeting?
Well, we know this took place many months ago, and it took place when Jamal Khashoggi entered the consulate, actually the embassy in Washington, for a routine matter and was immediately noticed by officials there who called up to the ambassador's office. He was summoned up to have coffee with the ambassador, who was Prince Khalid bin Salman, the brother of the most powerful person running Saudi Arabia. By all accounts, it was a friendly meeting, but it came as Saudi officials were really working hard to try to lure Jamal Khashoggi back to Saudi Arabia, at first with this charm offensive, telling him how welcome he would be if he returned to the kingdom, and ultimately through more forceful means, as we saw with his killing.
And Josh, did Khashoggi's friends say how he responded to that Saudi proposal?
Well, his friends say that he was not particularly convinced that if he truly returned to Riyadh as they wanted, that he would be safe. He figured that it was essentially a trap. He would be brought back to Saudi Arabia and then imprisoned for life, or worse, he would essentially disappear. And that was the reason that despite even being offered a job in the Saudi royal court, if he were to return, Mr. Khashoggi declined and decided to stay out of Saudi Arabia.
And as for Khalid bin Salman, the ambassador to the United States, he's not in the US at the moment, is he?
No, and his absence has really sparked a lot of speculation about whether he'll continue to be ambassador. Look, he essentially lied to the U.S. government, to members of Congress, and to the public about what happened. Now, whether he knew that the information he was giving at the time was inaccurate is a matter of dispute. But the fact of the matter is there's not a lot of trust left between him and policymakers in the U.S. And the fact that he's been gone since the killing back in Riyadh and has not returned has left a lot of folks, both here and in Saudi Arabia, wondering whether he may be replaced.
All right, well, thank you very much, Josh Lederman in Washington with the latest there. Well, meanwhile, European leaders have been maintaining the pressure on Saudi Arabia to punish those responsible for the killing, with both the British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel saying they were unsatisfied with the answers coming from Riyadh so far.
The claim that Mr. Khashoggi died in a fight does not amount to a credible explanation. There remains an urgent need to establish exactly what happened on the 2nd of October and thereafter.
Look at the monstrosity that happened in the Saudi Arabia consulate in Turkey. It must be cleared up. And as long as it has not been cleared up, there won't be any arms exports to Saudi Arabia. I promise you this.
Well, in just a short while, the Turkish President Erdogan is due to reveal what he knows about the investigation. I'm going to look into that a little bit more now with the journalist Christina Jovanovski, who's outside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Good morning to you, Christina. Just talk us through what we're expecting today.
Well, in about 3 hours' time, we expect President Erdogan to go to Parliament. He'll appear alongside his MPs, the members of his ruling party, and he says he'll speak about the truth of what has happened to Jamal Khashoggi in this consulate behind me. The question is, how much responsibility will he put on the Saudi crown prince, effectively the leader of Saudi Arabia? Will he claim that this crown prince had ordered the death of this journalist? That's going to be a big question that could create a bigger crisis for the two countries, as well as the West and the allies of Saudi Arabia. Will they also put responsibility on the crown prince? We've heard reports that Saudi Arabia is protecting this crown prince, not going to put the blame, at least publicly, on him and have no plans to replace him. So will Erdogan want to create a greater crisis and directly hit out at Saudi Arabia and claim that the crown prince was responsible for the death? That's going to be a big question. We don't know if he's going to provide any more evidence. We had seen recently, yesterday, a lot of more developments. Will he provide more? We don't know yet. Perhaps that's a strategy to keep us wondering and grab our attention.
Well, meanwhile, in Riyadh, there's a big investment conference starting today. There's Davos in the desert, as it's been called. We've heard a lot of people saying they're not going to go. They're going to embargo that. Who is still going?
Well, Russia and the total oil companies say they're going to go. The US, the UK, and France have said they're not going to go. France had recently said that it's going to suspend all official visits to Saudi Arabia until we know what has happened to Mr. Khashoggi. This could be significant. This could be a sign that Saudi Arabia is losing some of its crucial Western allies. But the fact that some other high-profile guests are coming to this conference, Saudi Arabia could claim that it's still a success. The point of this conference is to bring more investments into Saudi Arabia, bring more money, and allow it to diversify its economy away from the large dependence on its oil export that it has. Crucially, we'll have to see how the crown prince will react to the boycott. Will he attract non-Western countries and move Saudi Arabia away from Western countries? We could be seeing the future of what could be a really big geopolitical struggle. This is a crucial Middle Eastern ally. At the same time, Turkey is an important NATO country to the U.S. Which side will Washington and the West take? That's going to be a big question for the future.
It certainly is. Thank you very much. Christina Jovanovski in Istanbul. US President Donald Trump says the country will build up its nuclear arsenal until other nations come to their senses. That's a quote. This comes after the president said the US will withdraw from a landmark arms control treaty. Russia has warned it will respond in kind if the US begins to develop more weapons. Luke Barber has the latest.
President Donald Trump's vow to bolster his country's nuclear arsenal sees an escalation of the US and Russia's war of words barely seen since the height of the Cold War. After Trump threatened to leave the 1987 Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Kremlin said it would respond in kind if Washington begins to develop more weapons.
Russia has not adhered to the agreement. This should have been done years ago. Until people come to their senses, we have more money than anybody else by far. We'll build it up until they come to their senses. When they do, then we'll all be smart and we'll all stop. They have not adhered to the agreement.
So you're saying no news, sir?
It's a threat to whoever you want, and it includes China, and it includes Russia, and it includes anybody else that wants to play that game.
The Cold War-era treaty banned medium-range missiles, reducing the perceived Soviet threat to European nations beyond the so-called Iron Curtain. However, Trump is convinced that Russia is not honoring its side of the deal. US National Security Advisor John Bolton, who is holding talks in Moscow with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, had previously pushed the president to withdraw from the treaty, citing Russia's development of a new cruise missile as a violation. However, he was told that withdrawal would deal a serious blow to the non-proliferation regime. Moscow has warned that it will take steps to maintain the balance of nuclear power.
If something like this happens, the world will be on the verge of another round of confrontation. I'm afraid to say, the verge of war. This wouldn't be desirable, and the responsibility of every politician on the planet is to avoid war and to make sure that the conflicts that do exist are peacefully resolved. This is the meaning of today's politics, and if someone acts differently, then he acts against humanity.
The treaty, negotiated by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, banned ground-launched missiles with a range of between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. Analysts say abandoning it would mark a significant setback for arms control. Luke Barber, Euronews.
Well, US National Security Advisor John Bolton will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin today. For more on that, let's go to our correspondent Galina Polonskaya in Moscow. Good morning to you, Galina. Before we get on to that meeting that we could expect today, just tell us about yesterday's meeting between the Russian foreign minister and John Bolton.
The US started to understand the Russian position better. That quote was picked up by many Russian media after the first day of Bolton's visit in Moscow. In the evening yesterday, he had a working dinner with Sergei Lavrov, and after the site of the ministry has published an official statement which was rather laconic. The sides have discussed many parts of the world, Syria, Ukraine, Korea, and questions of strategic stability. But sources say that those negotiations in Moscow are very tough. Before Bolton met with the Secretary of the Russian Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, and he said that the US needs to finalize its position on extending the START treaty. The INF treaty was, of course, discussed, and later Bolton, in various interviews given, he explained the US position. First, he said that Russia violates this treaty. Second, in the modern world, those two countries cannot control this problem as other countries are involved. Now, many war experts talking on Russian TV are very concerned. They say that if the US after will bring its arms to Russian borders, it will be a real threat to many Russian cities, even if Bolton had denied such intentions. The same analysts think that the fact that the US could extend SMART could mean that the US is ready to conduct a strategic dialogue with Russia.
And Galina, what can we expect from Bolton's meeting with Putin later today?
Well, we can expect another day of tough negotiations, but first Bolton is expected to meet with the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, and after with Vladimir Putin. And of course, Vladimir Putin is very well informed about all the details of the negotiations yesterday and is ready to give his answers. His press secretary Dmitry Peskov said that the Kremlin has plenty of questions which will be brought up. He said also that maybe Bolton will bring a signal about the next place of the meeting of Trump and Putin, even though he denied that the second meeting was prepared. Now the INF treaty seems to be on the top of the agenda. Russia keeps on denying that it violates this treaty and says that if the US will take any further steps after withdrawing, Russia is ready to give an immediate and very strong answer. Many politicians say that this will be a catastrophe, this withdrawal. Others, like Slutsky, whom I spoke with and whose interview you have just seen in the report, thinks that Trump is bluffing and that the US will never do such a step.
All right, well, thank you very much, Galina Polonskaya, with The View from Moscow there. Italy is standing by its 2019 budget plans, refusing to cut spending despite debt reaching twice the EU limit. The European Commission says Italy's proposed fiscal plan threatens the stability of the Eurozone. But Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte insists the extra spending is necessary to boost the country's struggling economy. Elena Cavallone reports.
Rome has defended its draft budget, starting a confrontation with Brussels which could last a long time. Italian finance minister replied on Monday to the letter sent by the European Commission asking for clarification about the deviation from the European parameters such as the high deficit. It was a difficult but necessary decision, he writes, due to the persistent delay in recovering pre-crisis GDP levels and the dramatic conditions that affect the most disadvantaged people of Italian society. Speaking to the foreign press, Prime Minister Conte said Italy wants to stay in the EU and is available for dialogue with the Commission. But the Italian budget plan threatens the stability of the Eurozone as it would increase the already high debt of the country.
We are eager to explain our budget law. In this letter, we already disclose the grounds on which we have based our budget law. We have explained the direction of our economic policy, the goals we want to reach, but we will sit at a table to discuss it with the European Commission.
European Commissioner for Economic Affairs, speaking on France Inter, insists on the need for Rome to respect the rules, asking for mutual respect.
I respect the Italian government, but it also must respect the European rules. It is the mutual respect that allows moving forward in this diverse Europe.
Beyond the official statement, a confrontation between Brussels and Rome is inevitable. The government claims to have the mandate to change the European commitments of previous governments, while all the other European member states are pressing for a tough stance on Italy. Giving flexibility would be seen as unfair also from those countries such as Portugal that in the past had to accept strict austerity measures.
We also know the perception that it gives to people that bigger countries can get away with things that smaller countries cannot. And that is very, very negative for the perception of the people on how fair the European institutions are.
The European Commission will discuss the next step for assessing Italy's draft budget on Tuesday. Elena Cavallone, Euronews, Brussels.
Well, let's get more on the European side of this story from Maeve McMahon, who's in Brussels for us. Good morning to you, Maeve. Italy's Prime Minister says that this spending will boost economic growth, but is it just too risky for the EU to accept?
Well, that's what the word in Brussels is. One economist I spoke to yesterday from Bruegel, Gregory Clay, said they're not even trying to fake it. He said the Italian government had taken a very confrontational stance in this latest dispute, and he said that they really should do much better. Now, also as concern, even though yesterday, of course, that 4-page letter that Elena pointed out there in that report struck a more conciliatory tone, and it said that the Italian government was just adapting, if you like, to the current climate. The thing is, though, back in June, when this new Italian government took over, they inherited as well an objective to reduce the budget deficit to 0.7% by 2019. But in the end, they decided to go the absolute other way and increase it to 2.4% by 2019. And some in this town, economists from both the European Commission and the IMF, believe that their forecasts are just too optimistic. On top of that, we've seen countries like Austria and countries like Netherlands weigh in to offer their take on this whole confrontation. And Austria, for example, their Chancellor Sebastian Kurz said just yesterday that they will not be paying up when it comes to Italy, and that Italy would have to obey by the rules. The same stance coming as well from the Netherlands.
And what's next in this standoff? How do you break the deadlock?
Well, today we'll see Pierre Moscovici, that's the EU's finance commissioner, gather his fellow commissioners in Strasbourg to discuss the Italian draft budget for 2019. And economists here believe that it's hard for the Commission now to be lenient like they were in the past with France and Germany, because back then they could cite exceptional circumstances. But in this stage, in this situation, the Italian government is actually taking back reforms that were introduced a couple of years ago when it comes to pensions, for example. So time, of course, will tell, but the European Commission does have tools at its disposal in the Stability and Growth Pact. It could eventually sanction or fine and punish the Italian government, even cut off some of its cohesion funds. But many reckon it's likely not to go that far, because one does know that over in Italy, Euroscepticism is on the rise. There was a Eurobarometer out last week that said 4 in 10 Europeans weren't that fond of the European Union project. Many media, of course, as you can imagine, has been discussing this as well in the newspapers the last few days, and some over in Germany believe that the European Commission should take a more lenient approach on Italy and ask them to fight corruption and work in other areas instead of really coming to blows on this. So time, of course, will tell.